way, in another nation it could look another. And especially somewhere like Dubai, a restaurant is likely to be catering to like all different nationalities, because we've got so many here, that the hiring manager's preference of the way something should be done might not necessarily be the preference of the client that's about to walk into the restaurant.
100%. 100%. And yeah, and this is something I've tried to tackle in a recent job, based around the fact that we want the floor staff and the serving staff to almost perform, you know. But I question whether they understand from where they come from and where they grew up, that do they actually understand in their core what that means. Now, I come from the UK. I went to my first restaurant, you know, must have been 8 years old, you know, something like this, and then gone on to numerous restaurants. And as a teenager, gone into bars and pubs and everything like this. And, you know, and I say these things openly. I say them at work, which is you only know how to give good service if you've received it. So when I was a bartender, you knew what bartenders you wanted to be like, because I was a bartender in the West End of London. And some guys were hilarious and flaring and big crowd entertainers. And you went to work thinking, I want to do that, you know. And I think that what there needs to be a lot more of here in Dubai is the actual education to people in the restaurant trade that come from certain cultures as to what all of it actually means. You know, why do you introduce yourself? Why should you tell somebody their name? And I don't believe that there's enough attention paid to that. The point I was going to make earlier, which might be a bit racy, but I'm going to talk about my own nation, our nation of people. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so if I offend myself,
don't bring me into this. I don't know what you're going to say.
No. I'm not bringing you into this. No, 100%. I'm not bringing it into. But we're both from the UK.
Yeah.
So the thing is, in the early 90s, the being a waiter or a bartender was not a career.
Right.
You know, it was not a career. Like you were supposed to go on to university and do all kinds of stuff, but you didn't. Being a chef was a career, but being a waiter or working in a pub was not something you said as a 15-year-old. You know, I want to do that. You know what I mean? Now, over my time in the business, which started in 1995 until 2015, one of the toughest cultures or nationalities to recruit and manage were the English, because I always got the sense that they didn't think it was a career move for them, so they were always doing it to facilitate something else. Whether it was going through university, or especially in the West End of London, a lot of actors and people like this. And so what you get as a manager who's passionate about it is you're not getting that from the team, because they don't, I don't want to say care, but they don't.
It's just a stopgap job, isn't it? Until they get to where they want to get to.
Yes, it's a stopgap job. Whereas if you take somewhere like the United States, where it is a career, and it can go on to be, you know, something, you could be a bartender for life in America, and it's not, it's deemed as a proper career. You get a different reaction from that sort of culture and demographic to hire. So there is a question. Because you do your own podcast, so I don't know whether you're interviewing me or the other way around. But my question is that when it comes to the cultural intelligence, the more that people learn that, let's say, that culture, this is going to be, that culture of workers, that culture of direct talkers, that culture is would people steer more towards a particular culture the more they understand it?
Well, I think once you start to understand the culture, it's easier for you to navigate those nuances when they arise.
Yeah.
So the more we become more culturally intelligent, the more we can then, you know, handle those challenges when they come up. So once you've maybe become more accustomed to a certain nationality, it might be easier for you to hire them, because you know in your mind how they're going to work in the workplace. I think what we often forget, though, is that, you know, when people are bringing in employees from different countries into Dubai, and then they want to pay like a very low salary, then you will get somebody that's willing to work for that low salary. If you're paying a much higher salary, you will get somebody that's willing to work for that salary. But with that comes, a different social economic status. You'll have somebody which has, a much higher level of education. So you're talking about your point where you're having an expectation on the staff to understand how you want them to perform, if you like, for when the client comes into the restaurant, but then recognizing that they've maybe never had any life experience of eating in a restaurant. So there's that, in terms of that educational piece of what do we expect you to do and how do we expect you to do it, you'd have to kind of take that right back to the beginning, because you'd have to kind of teach them that restaurant culture, and then they could understand, what good service looks like, and then be able to, behave in that way as a server. But if you've got somebody that perhaps has come from a much higher position, if you like, in terms of social economic status, the likelihood is they will have had, restaurant experience. They would have had the expendable cash to be able to go to restaurants. They would understand. They would have had life experience of what like a restaurant service looks like. And so then when you're explaining to them, this is what we expect of you, this is how we want you to serve people, you wouldn't be starting from scratch, because they've personally experienced that. So, and I think that is often what's forgotten in this region. And, when there is cultural clashes or a misunderstanding about why somebody in the workplace did something in a certain way, and it's not what we expected or how we anticipated they would do something, we're also forgetting, like, what are their life experiences? We're, if we're employing somebody that for a basic salary, then, what exposure have they had to certain, certain workplaces? So I think then what unfortunately ends up happening is there's like labels then given to certain nationalities of people, where we say, oh, well, these people don't even know how to do X, Y, Z.
Yep.
And so we then call into question like a whole nation's intellect, when actually you're like, when you're actually basing it on somebody that's maybe a driver who's not been educated, as an example. Not everybody from that nation would be uneducated, and so I think there's some really bad stereotypes that exist in this region, in terms of these nationalities are like this, these nationalities are like that, when we're not factoring in.
Well, we're not looking. Not we.
We as Dubai people.
But we're not looking enough behind the person.
Yeah.
This is something I also think is extremely important, which is, what does a restaurant look like in your eyes? I found this out firsthand where, company I work for, we took all our trainers to a couple of Dubai's leading restaurants, and they said, thank you, this is the first time we've ever been to a restaurant.
Yeah.
And it's not chucking shade at a company or anything like that. It was a brilliant idea. It was a brilliant thing to do, because you understood that possibly the most consistent restaurant experience that many hotel staff actually have is the staff canteen.
Yeah.
And people might find that hard to accept, but then I would possibly challenge people to say, well, don't expect cultures to perform how you want them to perform without actually understanding, like you've just mentioned as well, what's it like to live in their shoes. I think that's massive. Can you believe that nearly 40 minutes has gone by?
Wow.
Out of a 50-minute recording. I mean, that has just absolutely flown. So look, I wanted to shift away from that. And I do want to say, first of all, you do your own podcast.
Yes.
You do. And
with
you do
Sarah
it with
Brooks.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Sarah Brooks, who's been on Tasty Humans herself. Yes. I wanted to ask, how are you finding the experience? Because I think you're one of the first podcasters I've had on my podcast,
So So what most people maybe don't know is that Sarah and I did an episode and it never got aired
Okay.
because we were like bouncing all over the place in our conversation, and actually what that did though was help us to understand what we thought good looked like and what kind of prep we needed to do for the next one. And so it's been interesting. I think we've now got to a point where so you don't do anything scripted. Ours aren't scripted, but we definitely have,
Obviously.
we definitely have an intention of this is the specific topic and these are the things that we want to make sure we cover during the session.